fight songs, and of course our beautiful alma mater. And I just want to take 1 minute before we start with the rest of the evening and thank the communications and marketing team here at the University of Nebraska. Kelly Barton. Just when I was done, I was too quick to thank you. What a great video production that was. Tonight's a very special evening. And so we have all of you. It makes it extremely special. Our community supports the university in many ways, and this evening's one more. We have some very distinguished guests, including not one but two former presidents of the University of Nebraska system. And I'm not sure if I should introduce you by seniority, by age, or order of service. So I'm just going to jump right in. To your right of the podium, to my left, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ronald Rossmann. He was the president of the university starting in 1977, and all the way during the consideration in the beginning of the transition from Kearney State College to the University of Nebraska at Kearney. To your left, to my right, we have Dr. Martin Massendale, University of Nebraska president from 1989 to 1993. And Martin was in charge of the transition and many of those difficult discussions that occurred and bringing in and has a unique view of the transition and years to follow, and is still actively engaged in the University of Nebraska system. So, Dr. Martin. Presidents, it's great to have you here. It makes our event special, but perhaps even historic. There's, I guess a few years have passed. There's no politicians we need to be particularly concerned of. The legislature's still in session, so this evening maybe we can talk a little candidly about what occurred. We're also grateful to have the perspective of several others who were either on the center stage or the front row watching these events from 1989 to 1991. To your far left, to my right, John Payne. John was a Nebraska Region for 18 years, from 1980 to 1998. He still lives here in Kearney. And John, we're so appreciative of your friendship and your service, and particularly good to see you. John. This evening, before I came, I decided I was going to slip away and take a real quick dinner. And I was going to review, and I thought, I'll go someplace where nobody knows who I am, and nobody will know me. Who's the first person I run into with our next panelist? She and her family were there, and they're kind enough to be here this evening. Kim Carlson is uniquely qualified to reflect on UNK's 25 years as part of the university system. She was a Kearney State College student during the transition. She is now a UNK professor of biology. She received her first UNK degree in 1992, and her second in 1994. She's known as being candid and correct in a very good way. One of our best professors, Kim Carlson. Last but not least, to your far right, to my left, we're glad to welcome our good friend Pete Katsiopoulos. As an alumnus of Kearney State, Pete has been Kearney's mayor, city councilman, has worked at the University of Nebraska Central Administration on statewide economic development. He's led the UNK Foundation here. He works for the UNK Alumni Association. And during the key years that we're going to talk about this evening, Pete was a member of the Nebraska State College Board of Trustees. Our good friend, Pete Katsiopoulos. Let me take you back to 1989 for just a moment before we begin with our panel. 1989, the legislature was a year that many issues first cropped up. In fact, many of them are still on the scene today. But perhaps one of the most prominent issues of the day were those of higher education and the dissatisfaction over the state college system's treatment of Kearney State College. Kearney State College, as you saw in the movie, had grown much faster than the other state colleges, and they weren't able to keep up with the budget needs of a very quickly growing campus. And because those needs were not met, other forces began to formulate. The start of the 1989 legislative session saw the introduction of three competing concepts dealing with higher education in Nebraska. First was LB 160, introduced by Senator Jerome Warner, a young freshman by the name of Christensen, and Senator Lorraine Langford. That bill would have transferred Kearney State College into the University of Nebraska system. There was a second bill introduced, LB 247. It was introduced by the chair of the Education Committee, Ron Whitten. And that would have studied the idea of a transfer, but also looked at all of higher education governance. And the final bill that was introduced was LB 760, introduced by Sandy Schofield from Western Nebraska, which would have changed the names of all the existing state colleges and made them state universities. For example, Kearney would have been called Central Nebraska State. Chadron would have been known as Western Nebraska State University. Actually, the idea had come from the North Platte Telegraph. Sandy liked that, and so she decided to draft it into a bill. And she would have retained the Board of Trustees, but obviously called them another name. The transfer bill became the point of attention for Kearney. The community put on a full-court press. They hired a lobbyist, developed a plan of attack. The fact that Jerry Warner was the chief sponsor added great credibility to the movement. It was also his legislative skills that were essential at that point to help us. One such example was the unspoken claim against transferring Kearney into the university system was it was unconstitutional. Jerry had a great ability to see into the future. He could see weeks and months ahead of most of us. And so, sensing that would be a point of contention on the floor, we asked the Attorney General's opinion. These bills were introduced in early January. This would have happened about the first week of February. The bills were heard in committee towards the end of February, February 21st to be exact. Lots of input, lots of support for the transfer. Many of the people here this evening who testified in favor of that bill. The study bill represented more of a reasoned approach, and the bill that would change all the names was really seen as a way to defeat this whole thing and sort of just put it away. After the committee hearing, Senator Witham, as the chair of the committee, decided that he would put his study bill out and move that out of committee onto the floor. He prioritized that measure, which meant that it was going to be considered for the session. And the day before the bill was debated, the Attorney General issued an opinion, and sure enough, declared it was unconstitutional, citing that the Constitution read, "The general government of the state colleges now existing shall be vested in the direction, under the direction of the legislature and the Board of Trustees." Well, promptly, the Kearney community wasn't going to stand still. In fact, I think Senator Warner probably told everybody that was going to happen. We already had a law firm in Omaha hired, and they issued another opinion, the exact opposite, finding the legislature was free to transfer the Kearney campus. A very wise move by Jerry Warner. He anticipated those problems and diffused them. There was no advantage to those AG's opinions or other opinions issued. Now, both the other bills, the 170 and 760, were left in committee, and so the focus really was on Ron Witham's LB 247. The day before the debate, the original introducers of LB 160 added an amendment onto Witham's bill. That was 27 years ago tonight that happened. The next day, the bill was debated at length. I think to call the debate fierce was an understatement. Very divided, very heated. Lincoln's Don Wesley was a good friend, by the way. But Don Wesley led the opposition. He pointed out that the governor, the Board of Regents, and the Board of Trustees all took positions and studied the issue before any action would be taken. He observed that all three of those entities did next to nothing to deal with the issue. Here's his quote. This is on the floor of the legislature. They're all watching and listening while they're strong lobbying on behalf of Kearney State to come into the system. The better course of action is to study and not proceed, and possibly not irreparably harm our higher education system. He continued, the last time we went through this issue was 20 years ago when UNO was created. And looking back, there are many that see that point as a definite point in which the university started to decline, particularly for the Lincoln campus. And the Lincoln faculty members remember that day, they grew that day. He further said, we will see a diminishment of resources going to the other campuses, and particularly perhaps the flagship campus at the University of Nebraska. That's all we needed. The opposition gave the greatest speech of all. After a day-long debate on the amendment number 25, the amendment to bring the Kearney campus into the university system is attached to Senator Whitman's bill. It still needed to advance. It did. It got 29 votes now, with 12 people voting against it and 8 chickens not voting. You know, that was a very interesting debate. It left many scars. And again, not picking on Senator Don, but Senator Wesley had this. There are some at the university system and the central administration office that would very much like to see that vote. They like the idea of having Kearney in the university system. They think they can control Kearney better from there. They can diminish Kearney's wild ways. And I think, instead of Kearney being kept under control, it will, in fact. Kearney will be unleashed and unleashed again to do detriment all over the state. These were kind of fighting words. The next round of debate, 1 week later, saw vigorous opposition again. The bill ultimately was advanced to final reading with the same vote. The final passage came on May 18, 1989, and both sides were given one last plea, for and against. There were 36 people who voted for the bill at the end, 11 against and 2 not voting. And that was extremely important because it was apparent that the bill was going to pass. But if it had more than 33 votes, the emergency clause could be enacted, and as soon as the government would sign the bill, the transition could occur. And so that was extremely important. Governor Orr waited the very last day to sign it. It was signed on May 23rd, 1989. And July 1st, 1991 was the date established for the transfer. It was a fairly short period of time, as I'm sure Martin can attest, and we'll try to talk about that. Many, many things had to be done. The members of the State Board of Trustees, or at least some of them, refused to implement the transfer. So shortly after that, Bob Spire, the Nebraska Attorney General, filed an original action in the Supreme Court to declare the legislation unconstitutional. That's extraordinary. In most cases, they get to the Supreme Court and have to work its way up through the trial areas and be done on appeal, taking many, many months. The Supreme Court granted original jurisdiction. In other words, they took the case right away. They cited that the matter had few facts in dispute and was a matter of great public importance. The matter was briefed and argued before the Supreme Court, and less than 1 year later, on May 18, 1990, an opinion was filed. Now, if you're familiar with the Supreme Court, there's not a ceremonious way of handing out opinions. One of the staff people walk out with a handful of opinions and they throw them on the table, and you're like a bunch of dogs trying to sift through and find the one you want. And we've been there many, many weeks waiting for this. That day finally occurred, and of course you never start reading from the front. You always go to the back to see what happened. And at first glance, as you know, the Supreme Court has 7 justices. And you start to look, oh my goodness, a majority, 4 of the 7 voted this unconstitutional. And I remember the blood rushing out of my head and that pit in my stomach. And then I happen to remember that, oh yeah, it's a supermajority. It's 5 votes. And the Lincoln 4. And thus, LB 247, moving Kearney State College into the university system, became law. And I think it points out one more time in the history of this institution that nothing's ever been easy. And the transfer was effective, and it occurred. And This summer, on July 1st, we will mark the official 25th anniversary of coming into the university system. And so with that, it's difficult to start here on the panel, but I'm going to start run a little bit because you may start before some of the words I spoke about. Could you talk to us a little bit about what was going on in the university system from your perspective, and how this Kearney thing started to bubble up? What were the beginning roots of that from your seat?
Well, it began in, I think, 88 in the legislative arena, not in the legislature, but among us who were trying to find a way to get this institution, which was then, as you know, Kearney State College, into our system. But I learned in 88, I think it's 88, might have been 87, doesn't matter. Comes out the same. I learned that Senator Lorraine Langford had, at least the rumor was, that she had 20 signatures of senators to bring Kearney and the rest of the state colleges into a separate university system. And I thought, frankly, that would be disaster for Nebraska, because I knew of several states in which there were 2 or more university systems, and there were troubles there. Plus, in our state, at that point, if you think back, the dollars, tax dollars that were allocated to universities were going, mainly our university and the state colleges, were going not necessarily down, but they were holding tight. And Bill and I were good friends. And we spent a lot of time with some of our associates down in Lincoln when the legislature was in session in those years, arguing about, not arguing, that's too strong a word, talking about how can we do this? And he was persistent in wanting to have a university system. Well, enough of that. I just put a period there because we pretty much clarified that. As soon as I heard about Lorraine's, I don't know whether it was true or not, so-called signatures, I went to my good friend, Jerome Warner, who took it immediately to the tractor where he was cultivating. And that's where he often said, that's where I make my good decisions, and I have no doubt about it, because he thought and thought and thought. And he was a great thinker. I will say more about him later if I have a chance. But in any event, he then did in fact do what you have already described, and there's no need for me to repeat that. I just think that it worked out beautifully, but I have to freely say to you, and I do so without any hesitancy, I was concerned about having a second system, in the second university system in this state.
John, you were on the Board of Regents. What were they thinking and discussing at this time?
Well, it was a 4-4 vote. We had 2 Omaha senators that were on our side, or excuse me, Regents. Kermit Hansen and Jim Moylan was definitely in favor of Kearney, and myself, and I can't recall it, but we did have 4, and the others didn't want Kearney. And so it became very contentious, and Ron remembers we had some rip-roaring discussions about that. But eventually, then the next year it got worse. Kermit Hansen and I were the only 2 wanting Kearney in the system, and the other 6 were no. That's, I guess, when we changed presidents, unfortunately. But it was not a pretty sight.
There were some tough days in the Board of
There were
Regents.
some real tough days.
Let me put a PS to that name. Now he's jumped up to 1989. And in 1989, as was the case every legislative year, our primary lobbyist, meaning our in-house lobbyist. It was Ron, no, it was,
Jim Wrangler, or no?
no,
Oh, right.
Oh,
come on. You guys are old. Lee Rock.
thank you. Okay.
Lee Rock.
I'll get up there.
Lee Rock and I, as we did every legislative session, which was our responsibility, we had lunch or sometimes breakfast with every single legislator by himself or herself. And in each case, we did not bring up, we had a pact, we would not bring up the subject. But in every case, the senator would bring up the subject. Now, what's the deal about it, they would say? What's the deal on this Kearney thing? And I always tried to say, and I think Lee would testify, and he sometimes said it himself, we have a 4-to-4 split on the regions. And I'd stop there. I mean, I might have said a few more things, but I said, I didn't identify anybody. And then they'd always say, well, what's your view? I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be quiet. I said, in each case that where I was asked, I think it's a wise thing for us to do. And that's what ended my career.
I suppose I could step on real quickly here and say we're glad that happened. Okay. Very interesting. Pete, you're on the State Board of Trustees. Kind of on the other camp of this. What was going on at that point in time? What was the discussions like and your perspective?
Well, to be candid, when I was appointed, I served under both Governors Carey and Governor Orr. And after 4 or 5 months on the board, initially in '83, I almost thought about leaving. It was a strange group. They didn't believe in open meeting laws. Decisions were made on Friday night before the public meeting Saturday. And a couple meetings I left early, so you get the picture. So fast forward several years after what turned out to be a good friend and mentor was Jerry Warner, who basically told me, Pete, either work with the machinery you have in place or you work to figure out how to rework the machinery. And so, as has been alluded to on the tractor, here it comes. And initially, the discussion was to have all 4 of the campuses come on board to join the university. But as time evolved, say the 9, 10, 11 o'clock hours, the wheels started falling off. There were just 2 of us left out of 7 that were supporting. And quite frankly, we did an end around. And I know if any of my colleagues are still living, that they were not aware that a few of us were working behind the scenes to make that work. We felt, with Jerry Warner, President Nestor, Earl Rademacher, myself, that this would be a good thing for Kearney State. And what we've seen on the video tells the rest of the story. So it was very touching.
Could you just touch a little bit about the Kearney Community Organization at that point? What it was like?
Well, part of me was personally in transition too, because I was not going to get, not by my choice, to be reappointed on that board. And that's when I ran for council and mayor the following year. So to me, the community was very much behind it. It was, Bill Nestor, as somebody stated, was a tiger. And very competitive. He was a baseball player as a youth. And we shed a lot of tears together, and we laughed a lot, but I think we had a great relationship with the community and the campus. Did before Bill Nestor, still do. So I think that's been a key.
You know, I'm going to get to the student point of view, but Martin, you were in a unique position. You were chancellor at UNL during this period of time. I'm sure you had no problems on campus. Can you explain or talk about what the view was like from Lincoln during this period of time, at least from your perspective?
I've learned some things every night myself, which is very interesting. I'd say that the group that had the most concern was probably the faculty. And a majority of the faculty, I think, obviously would oppose it. Some of them were indifferent and some were supportive, believe it or not. And it seemed like that you didn't never take any position because it wasn't appropriate to take a position on it. But I think that most people were probably sitting and waiting to see what happened on it, quite honestly. And I felt a little bit like longtime senator from Illinois, Senator Everett Dirksen, who one time said, he was asked about where he stood on an issue like this. And he said, well, some of my friends are over this side and some of my friends on this side. And I support my friends.
That's very good. Obviously, you were then selected as president for the period of transition. So, when you first came in, was that part of the deal with the Board of Regents?
Yeah, that was pretty well decided at that time. I would say after the decision was made that the faculty who opposed it, I think, came around very well and supported the integration of it. And there were many things to do, moving from the college to university. And the main concern of the faculty, is what Dr. Austin said earlier, was they thought moving from a college to a university would require more graduate education, require more research. And with the limited resources available in Nebraska, that it would probably take away from the other campuses, particularly the Lincoln campus. So that was a concern. It wasn't a personal concern. And we got through that, and then I worked with Bill Nestor and others along the way to try to implement none of these things. There's one graduate college with the university, and so the one in Kearney had to be changed. The chancellor's name of the president changed to chancellor, and a number of things of that nature. And I think that the faculty, as pointed out in the video, really has changed tremendously in that period of time. It's been a good move. I don't think there's any question about it now. It brought, I think, the university together better. They questioned Nebraska being served well, undergraduate education, getting into it. And so I think that certainly in hindsight, it was a good move.
Well, one of the great products of that move, as we've all said as faculty members, Kim Carlson, you're one of the great shining examples of that. But you have also a different perspective. What was it like being a student during this period?
Well, actually, it was really interesting. There was no, of course, it was with students. You think, well, whatever the administration is going to do, they're going to give you these types of punches. But had a very kind of unique perspective. My husband and my boyfriend at the time had two roommates who both were on student senate, and President Nestor's son was also on student senate. So they got to have some conversations, and his two roommates were on opposite ends of either becoming a University of Nebraska Kearney or staying at Kearney State College. So on those nights when student senate was over, I'd always go over to the house, which was so much fun to sit there and listen and yell at each other about this. And actually they had a really good grasp of what was occurring. One, because Nestor's son was on the student senate at the time, we brought that perspective too, because President Nestor didn't have any qualms about talking to people about what was going on and what he was trying to do. And with the students, I think the biggest concerns that there were was that this tuition moved to go up. Because a lot of students, like myself, came out to Kearney State College, came out here because the tuition was so inexpensive. So that was one of the biggest concerns, what's going to happen financially. Also another concern, true concern, might seem a little silly, but was, do we have to be red and white? You know, red and white, UNC is red and white, UNL is red and white, we want to stay blue and gold. And and that was a big concern for students, but a lot of it was, we really have no say, which really wasn't true. We really had a lot of say in students, because there were student forums. I did attend 3 different student forums. We did have an opinion, the same poll that the faculty took about what would you like the name to be. The students also took that poll, and actually came out different than what the faculty did. We wanted to be part of the University of Nebraska system. And as I said, I had a unique perspective having those 2 friends who were on the student senate and actually getting hearing all the pros and the cons. So, and a lot of that happened that last year. Students don't do much until it's the very last moment to teach. And there was no difference here.
Juan, you talked about Jerry Warner a little bit, but what do you suppose if Jerry was alive today, his view would be of what we did and what occurred?
If Jerome Warner were here, and he is in spirit, by the way, seriously, were it not for him, I don't know that we'd be here. But in any event, I think Jerome would say, if he had a microphone, this was a very good decision. I'm glad I went out on the tractor and drove for a while. Because that's exactly what he did. And it was just a couple of days later when he had drawn the conclusion that we had to go this route. And I think he would say that what has occurred here is beyond his expectations at that time. Meaning, the growth, and I'm not talking just numbers, I'm not talking just buildings, but the growth in quality and in spirit and in a sense of really, really making it a university. He would be tickled to death. In fact, if I may throw in a comment, what I'm saying is a voluntary comment, which I'm going to make even to people. Say no. I have been sitting here thinking, as we've been discussing the events that took place, and particularly after the film, and I'm saying to myself, where is the name Warner out here? Have we thought about that? Let me give you that suggestion free. I'm serious.
Christensen, there are 2 ones that you might want to consider in that regard. First one had the appropriation, I think, of $50,000 to start the normal school. The second one, instrument in what Dr. Austin just said.
That's right. Charles obviously introduced the first bill back in 1903 to cite the campus. He didn't cite that particular site, but it was very supportive. So it's a small state. That's a pretty,
Right.
that's a great idea. It's one we maybe we'll
May I
Yes, absolutely.
I think another thing that happened that may have been just not quite as important, but certainly important in the emergence of the campus and so forth, joining the University of Nebraska Foundation, I think it provided many, many things that benefited the campus because it had the structure, it had the people and so forth that go out and help raise money. And I think now so many things are happening because of private money. That joining the UNK Foundation, I think, was another great thing.
Yes.
I've come to know in the last year or 2 that, bless his heart, Andy Anderson, who's not with us longer, but perhaps here in spirit also, was, I believe, chairman or board chair of the University of Nebraska Foundation at the time. And he and his vice chair were stalwarts in that effort that Dr. Massengale mentions, in that Kearney's $5 million at the time took University of Nebraska assets over $300 million, and they wanted to get to that goal. Now those assets are $1.8 billion. So, and about 25 years later.
John, I'm going to let you speak, but I also want to ask you for a little bit of an opinion. When the transition began to occur, when it was clear that this was going to happen, did the mood of the board change? Were they supportive? Did they help then President Massengale, or was there still some residual resentment?
I think it changed quite a bit. Don't you, Mark? I think they were all in favor. And it's amazing how they came about. One of the key people that we haven't mentioned was Chancellor Dale Weber from UNO, and he was very much in favor of bringing Kearney into the system. And he lobbied Brad Ashford, who was the leader of the legislators in the Omaha area, and we were fortunate going back how it passed. That Dale was very pleased to get Kearney in.
And I think you would be amazed at the cooperation that occurs today between all the campuses as well. That was the largest fear, was that there would be regionalism, fractionalized campuses, and actually the campuses have worked very well together.
At the time, the Lincoln people felt the university was moving brick by brick, everything to Omaha. And of course, the Omaha people thought that Lincoln had everything and they were going to get more. So I think Kearney was a great balance on the whole situation.
So
Lincoln, a lot of people thought that Seward was out west.
I'm glad we're still in this. Kim, what do you think in terms, after becoming a faculty member, now you've had a chance to watch this full circle. Did you ever think that as a student, you'd be sitting here at the 25th anniversary as a faculty member? But given that, now as a faculty member, you obviously have some view of what occurred in the past and what happens today. Can you give us a little insight into that?
Sure. So things have changed a lot in the last 25 years. At the time when we were transitioning over to the university system, and I did take the opportunity to talk to some of the faculty that were here at the time to get their perspectives also. And they said, you know, they realized, they were told that it's going to slowly evolve. But one of the things that did happen, in my department, we had faculty members who earned their PhDs while working. That doesn't happen anymore. If you're hired as a faculty member, or excuse me, a tenure track faculty line, where you go start with an assistant professor, you have to have your PhD or be all done with dissertation. That was a change that happened because of changing over to the university system. That's in the board reaches bylaws. So that was a little different. There was also the fear that we're not an R1 institution. Are we going to have to be doing much more research? Well, in the sciences, we were really embracing that. Unfortunately, did not have the resources to do that. When I was a student here, our molecular biology lab was a closet, and it was probably, I'd say, 6 feet by 6 feet, and there was 12 of us in there at one time, and we did this technique called PCR that's all regulated on temperature, where you go to this water bath for 30 seconds, this for a minute, this for 30 seconds. We had 3 undergrads lined up, me being one of them, and a grad student going, go, 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 for an hour and a half, because we didn't have the money for the equipment. That's changed. When I came back, we also didn't have any labs. We had classrooms, and we doubled this lab. Went through the renovation, and now we have, if you haven't been to see Bruner Hall of Science, it's a completely different building than when I was a student. I always tell my friends, if you haven't been back, you need to come back. It's not the same campus. We have all sorts of, we have lab space, we have labs for faculty members to do research with undergraduates. We have a lot of equipment. We have a great camaraderie with the University of Nebraska Medical Center, UNO and UNL. We have great consortium of research with those campuses, a true university consortium. Did I see that as a student happening? No, I didn't. We thought we'd be viewed as the ugly redheaded stepchild of the university system. Because that's really the issue, right? You start as, you're the big fish in the pond of the state school system, and now you're going to have to go down to being the tiny little fish. And that was a big fear. And I think that in the time that since this has happened, it's actually turned into a great flag enrichment amongst the campuses.
Interesting. Pete, Kim's talked about what some of the good things are. I'd be interested from your view of the institution here. What do you think was the good things that happened? And do you think there were some things that weren't so good for us that have happened? I'd be interested in your observation.
You know, Kim's remarks, they triggered, I'm having flashbacks here like all of us all night here after watching that
You should
video.
take your medication.
Yeah, I know. I'll get to that later. But, you know, back to the State College Board, again, it was a very, to me it was, I thought I saw Earl Rademacher here tonight, who would attest. To me, the state college system did not take advantage of Kearney's size and their influence. And it was every fourth building, every fourth, it was bizarre. It was not about equity, it was about equal. And that, to me, kept, you know, I want to say in one sense holding Kearney back, but at the same time, you know, we've said it several times tonight, that they've been able to do more with less through their whole history. And that was a great example. By the time, after Jerry Warner's encouragement to change the machinery, putting prioritization of capital projects in the state, that was unheard of. And so, but I can see by the end of 5 or 6 years that even though we had those in place, there was still that fight, if you will. And instead of, again, using Kearney's leverage in the legislature with the governor, it just wasn't happening. And so, you know, having done the homework, the research as to what that university status would do for not only the faculty, but the capital, but the students, and history's only proved that to be right. And so, to me, there were a lot of things that we were challenged with, and I, to this day, it was not a bad move at all. Perhaps I'm prejudiced, but I think Earl would attest that I probably was tougher on Kearney those 6 years than I was just because I didn't want my flip to show, so to speak, for Kearney. And I'm terribly pleased, you can tell, and still am.
I get that, if I've learned anything this evening, it's that I'm going to go back out to Warner's storage shed. I still think he has. I'm going to take that tractor and park it down the lawn of the Capitol. Let them turn the set on it. John, here's what I'm going to do. We want to get to some questions from the audience, so I'm going to start with you, and we'll just come down the aisle here. Could you kind of give us some final observations before we go to questions from the audience?
Just one comment. When Martin became president, he instituted a new policy that the Board of Regents would honor and recognize each department throughout the university. There's 277 departments, and the very first winner of that award, and it included a $25,000 stipend, was the chemistry department at UNK. And the very first professor, I think, was Don Kaufman, chemistry. And I think that really made it where Kearney was part of the family.
Kim, that they felt good about that.
Well, it was a good move on your part, Martin.
Well, Martin Dixie was one of the beneficiaries of that. Just Kim, your department for this.
Yes, we won the university-wide departmental teaching award 2 years ago. Yeah, we did.
Kim, any last observations?
You know, having going from being a student, taking the transition, being very proud of the transition, and going all the way through the university system. I did my undergraduate, my master's degree here. I did my PhD at UNL, and I did a postdoc and was a research faculty at UNC. This is the best place to be.
Mark, I had a number of those breakfasts with you.
Yeah.
And you were a gracious host, but you also were a great communicator of the progress of transition. You gave me constant, candid feedback, some good, some going to take us a little longer. But I think that was a strength. Any final observations before we go to the audience?
Well, I had many meetings with Bill Nestor, as you can remember, or probably know about, that we got a number of things worked through. Bill was a tough negotiator, Ron has said before, but I think we got those worked through pretty well, and I've been very happy with the way it worked out. In fact, the people came together, and I think some of these talk about the Department of War. Primary reason that I did that is I thought that we could get better cooperation among and within departments if they had some reason to work together. And they'd almost have to work together if they qualified for that, which I think was a pretty good bonus at that time, $25,000 to the department, not to an individual.
Well, it was a good bonus for us. We just used that $25,000 to outfit all of our teaching laboratories with new microscopes. So we did with it.
Good, very good. I'm going to say, the last Pete, any final observations, maybe any big surprises or perhaps disappointments other than who became chancellor?
There with you. I think part of this is interesting as we reflect on it, in that both governors, Kerry and Moore, during that time, both, whatever was driving it, felt some kind of reorganization needed to be done in higher ed in Nebraska. Just didn't know how to go about it. And so, plus Jerry Warner's heart. I think Kearney has nothing to apologize for, past, present, future. And we have 4 unique campuses in this system. And I think that's healthy.
Ron, before we go to audience participation and questions?
I would like to make an observation that is patently obvious to everyone here, but it hasn't been uttered. And that is, an institution like this, for that matter, most any institution, is able to move forward and prosper to the extent that the leadership that is there is capable of showing the way. And the choice of chancellor for this place, my friends, was the best it could have been. And he's right there. Look, I'm not trying to butter him up. But I sure hear what I'm saying. I happen to have known him well in the legislature. He wasn't always as supportive as I'd like to see, but nevertheless. No, that's kidding. I'm kidding. He was always helpful and supportive. The second observation I'd like to make is this. I think it's time we stop thinking of this as a place. It's a philosophy. It's a gem. Don't lose sight of that.
Let's give everybody a hand. We wanted to spend a little time. Kelly, what do you suppose we have for time here? 15 minutes or so. It is hard for me to see in the audience. So Kelly, if you can help me pick out people, or we get a microphone. Kyle's got the microphone, and don't be shy. Right. We would take questions to the panel. They'd be happy to answer them. Surely I've got some papers.
I probably am, John's probably dying right now seeing me stand up here. Whoops, sorry. But I have to say that I really think that this group needs to understand who was the beginning incentive person to encourage Kearney going into the university system. I lived through this for a long, long time, and he really firmly believed that this needed to be done. And he worked very hard, and he tried his darndest and accomplished what he wanted, what his goal was, to get Kearney into the system. And I really, truly believe that he needs to be understood, and people need to applaud him for doing this very thing. Because he did a great job.
Now I'm going to ask you to be an auctioneer a little bit there. Other questions? Yes.
With regard to the university at Kearney, university system, even expanding out to the state college system, is there unfinished business that still exists to this day, even 25 years later?
Take care.
You mean whether the other 3 state colleges should be part of the university? Is that what you're talking about?
Any of that. I mean, does UNK have any unfinished business? Does the system have? Does the state college system?
Well, I think the state college, the 3 that are left, pride themselves on their teachers' colleges, and I think they want to continue to be that way.
As far as the university is concerned, Kearney it's been demonstrated tonight that Kearney has been a great addition to the entire university system. Pardon me?
I might comment on that in the context that I think that the community college is probably more coordination than what we have now. They seem to be each going their own way, and I'm not sure the state is getting as much benefit as it could be if they were more coordinated, brought together to work together.
There's a current region out in Region Bob Ferris, I think, is out there. He could answer some of these.
Well, I think Regent Short might take exception to be Bob being the only one here.
Excuse me, I can't see very well.
Well, first let me say, thank you for putting this on. What a tremendous presentation it was tonight. It's quite a celebration. Thank you very, very much on behalf of the Board of Regents. And I don't want you to take this literally, but I want you to understand the influence of Kearney State and the University of Nebraska at Kearney. Former chair Bob Ferris, Kearney State grad, Ken Schroeder, current chair for Kearney, Nebraska, and Chair-elect Robert Whitehouse, Kearney State grad. We're in charge. I just want to finish by saying, and pick up on President Roskin's observation about being a gym. The transition has really gone from an institution that was a diamond in the rough to a polished gemstone. This is a terrific transformation that has occurred in the past 25 years. And thank you, John Payne, for supporting that, and the rest of the presidents of the university and Pete Gonzalez. Thank you very much.
Kyle, is there some other questions out there? Jim Cudback. Are you here?
Oh, you could Cam's everywhere.
Jim, we haven't heard from you.
Just quick.
All right. Well,
25 years ago, I was chairman of the county board. Make a long story short, many of you were there. Bob Curry was here also at a meeting at the teachers college back then. And he asked a question after he sat there for 10 minutes, you know how he was. And he said, first of all, you got to ask yourself, what is in a name?
I was not aware until I did some homework about this issue, what across the country, when you're talking about faculty, students, and grant awards, those kinds of things. As a layperson, I didn't really understand what that U meant. And again, 25 years later, I think it's proved it. Now, I think we have to be careful when you say we have better students, we have better faculty, we have better capital. I mean, I think we have to be careful when we say that. But I would have to say, because Kim said it earlier, Dr. Nestor, came from Ohio State. He had just terminated the football coach, Woody Hayes. Everybody thought he was going to come to Kearney and take on the athletic department. He took on the faculty, and that was his goal, to raise the standards here. And we've had some incredible faculty through the years, but I think, as Kim has testified, that that has helped. And then what has that done? I don't remember the stat, but the last 4 or 5 years, the ACT of entering freshmen continues to go up each year. So I vote yes.
Others in the observation of the name? Jim, I would have this taller. It would have been easy just to put the name university to everybody and walk away and be project stationary. But this was more than that. This was bringing a campus into an established premier university in the country and making us part of that. And the name was really inconsequential. What really occurred was to become part of a system that we see the fruits of today. And you can call anybody anything you want to, and the name doesn't make a difference. But the proof is in what we really did. And what we did is elevate the quality of the campus theater, as you rightly point out, to where we give tremendous value that we could have never given to students today. Their degree is worth much more today, not because of the name printed on their diploma, but because of what got put into their head and the way they can think and act and perform as citizens. And I think that's the great value of this evening, is the opportunity we gave to students that they would have never had.
And that's why you're a chancellor.
You can call another question. One more.
Back there.
It's coming.
Then,
One over here. One at the top.
Well, I just want to say that, things are still evolving, even if it's been 25 years. It's been 15 years as chair of the math department, and part of that, we work with pre-engineers and try to get them to be transferred, be able to transfer to universities that had engineering schools. And it was difficult. We never seemed to get any feedback as to how we can make that transition be easy. And so I was real pleased that in the last publication from UNK that I got said that the engineering college at Lincoln and UNK had come to an agreement as to how pre-engineers could spend time here on the campus and make that transition there to finish their engineering degree. So I'm glad to see, I think that's a result of the fact that the medical center and our campus worked to get the new building. I think other departments, and I think watching UNO and UNL work out their differences between what can go on in Lincoln and what goes on in Omaha, I think they can see that everybody can benefit by having closer cooperation between all campuses and make transfer much easier to all of the programs.
Well said. Thank you very much. Before I adjourn us for the evening, the year of celebration will continue. And in the fall, and I don't have the date off the top of my head because we probably haven't selected that exact date yet, mid-September, we're going to have a dinner to celebrate when we have all the students back. And this time of year is tough. There's lots of things that go on in the spring that are a little preoccupied with, is that finals? And whatever. But we want to invite you back to help us celebrate in the fall, because I think at that point we're going to focus on what's the future of life. We've now brought us to the present day, and the real challenge is what do we do the next 25? Because the last 25 have been so successful and so fruitful. So with that, let's thank our panel one more time. Thanks to all of you who came this evening. I'm sure that some of the panel members will be around for a little bit longer. We'd love to visit. But thank you for coming. And above all, go Oilers.